Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today, breaking down Michael Cohen's testimony. Plus, the Biden administration is raising tariffs on a number of goods from China, and we hear about the unsolved case of a missing Michigan man. Michael Cohen took the stand yesterday in former President Donald Trump's hush money trial. He took a Manhattan jury step by step through Trump's alleged efforts to buy the silence of adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. I caught up with USA Today Justice Department correspondent Aisha Bagchi for the latest. Aisha, thanks for hopping on.
I'm glad to be here, Taylor.
So Aisha, the witness many have been anticipating, that's Michael Cohen, took the stand yesterday, and a recording between Cohen and Trump was played in court. Let's take a listen.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David.
What was on this recording and how crucial could this end up being?
Yes, this recording was actually played to the jury before, so they're hearing it again. But that is one indication that prosecutors think it's important, so they want to make sure that the jurors really do hear it. It's a recording that, according to the prosecution and according to Michael Cohen, involves him and Donald Trump talking about an earlier hush money deal involving Karen McDougal. She is a former Playboy model. She has described having a months-long affair with Donald Trump, which he denies, but she describes it as an affair that overlapped actually with Melania Trump's pregnancy. And we know that she was paid $150,000 as part of a hush money deal involving the parent company of the National Enquirer. You hear this recording where Cohen says what he's talking about is the deal. He mentions our friend David, that Cohen said was a reference to David Pecker, who was the head of the parent company of the National Enquirer at the time. The recording involves the two of them talking about financing. And Trump says to Cohen, pay with cash. So Cohen says that's all about the hush money deal. And really, that's a precursor to thinking about the hush money deal that is central to the charges in the case, which is the one that involves Stormy Daniels.
And Aisha, what else stood out to you from Cohen's testimony yesterday?
Cohen really did give some bombshell testimony for the prosecution. He basically described the two major parts of the case that are so crucial for the prosecution. One is talking about the hush money deal with Stormy Daniels. He went through that whole process, how it was paid, and he said something that was really crucial for the prosecution in proving their case, that Donald Trump's motivation for the hush money payment was about the election, that it did not have to do with Melania Trump. That's important because prosecutors say that the hush money payment violated federal campaign finance laws, and they need to prove that Trump was trying to conceal or commit some sort of crime when he was allegedly falsifying business records. And one of their theories is that it was a campaign finance violation. But if Trump can argue that really the hush money was about his family, about shielding Melania Trump from an embarrassing story or shielding his kids from that, that could be one way he gets out of kind of the felony charges in the case. Michael Cohen basically said Trump tried to push paying Stormy Daniels, and that he told Michael Cohen that if you can push the payment past the election, I won't care if her story runs after the election. It's the election that matters. That's basically what Michael Cohen had to say. And then Michael Cohen described a conversation involving Trump, Michael Cohen, and Alan Weisselberg. Weisselberg was the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. He is in jail right now for committing perjury in Donald Trump's most recent civil fraud trial in New York. But he was involved in a lot of dealings involving the Trump Organization. So Michael Cohen described a meeting between the three of them in which the allegedly falsified records were kind of discussed, the scheme around that. What you have to remember, I know a lot of people know about the hush money payment and this idea that it's a hush money trial, but ultimately this is a trial about falsifying business records. And what prosecutors say is that Donald Trump was reimbursing Michael Cohen for paying hush money to Stormy Daniels, but he falsified records to make it look like these were not reimbursement payments for the hush money, to make it look instead like these were payments to a lawyer over 2017 for ongoing legal services. This conversation that Michael Cohen discussed is really kind of the first direct testimony that we are getting about the idea that Donald Trump knew all along about the scheme around the reimbursement payments. Cohen said the three of them all met together and discussed the entire plan. Cohen asked, "Why don't you just pay me in a lump sum?" And the discussion was, no, we need to spread this out over 12 months of kind of equal payments. Cohen said that Donald Trump approved it. And that is really crucial because prosecutors are going to want to get at Donald Trump's intent and whether he really knew that there was a scheme to pretend that the payments to Cohen were about something else, and then ultimately to show that he was not only falsifying business records, but that he was doing it in order to unlawfully interfere in the 2016 presidential election by paying the hush money to Stormy Daniels and then covering it up on the back end.
This is a big week for this trial. Aisha Bagchi covers the Justice Department for USA Today. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Taylor.
The United Nations has reduced estimates for the number of women and children killed during Israel's war in Gaza by nearly half. In new data on May 8th, the UN reduced the number of women killed in Gaza since the war began to nearly 5,000 and the number of children killed to nearly 8,000. That's part of nearly 35,000 people killed in Gaza overall. The numbers adjustment may invite new scrutiny for figures that come from Hamas. The United Nations cites data from the Gaza Ministry of Health, controlled by Hamas, to produce casualty figures. The UN reports come with a disclaimer saying, quote, "The UN has so far not been able to produce independent, comprehensive, and verified casualty figures," unquote. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to press on across Gaza. They pushed into a refugee camp in Gaza's north this week, and Israeli operations in Rafah, which borders Egypt, have closed a main crossing point for aid. Stateside, President Joe Biden is at a crossroads on America's military support for Israel in its war against Hamas. Biden's decision to pause a shipment of arms to Israel, along with a State Department report that concluded U.S. weapons were likely used to conduct Gaza operations in ways that did not adequately protect civilians, marked a turning point for the president. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. President Joe Biden is significantly raising tariffs on electric vehicles, semiconductors, and several other goods imported from China. His administration says the move is meant to level the playing field in sectors where the Biden administration has made major investments. The higher tariffs have already drawn criticism from Chinese officials and come as Biden is courting the support of working-class voters in Midwest battleground states, including Michigan, the heart of the U.S. auto industry. Biden is also raising tariffs on Chinese solar cells, batteries, battery materials, cranes used at ports, and certain medical supplies, along with steel and aluminum imported from China. The Biden administration has for months accused China of unfair trade practices by flooding the global markets with goods at artificially low prices, putting U.S. manufacturing of electric vehicles, microchips, and other goods at a disadvantage. California utility regulators are proposing rejecting a request by AT&T to eliminate its responsibility to provide traditional landline phone service. That could have implications nationwide, according to a consumer advocate. Fewer telephone companies are offering basic landline phone service, as the utilities say the infrastructure is old and expensive to maintain, and demand for landline phone service is low as consumers move to mobile and other services. But consumer advocates have cried foul, saying basic landline service is important for the country's most vulnerable, including senior citizens who don't want to rely on cell service, consumers who cannot afford cellular service, and those in rural areas that may not have good access to cell or broadband internet services. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. And finally, we look at the unsolved case of a missing Michigan man, a white 36-year-old who disappeared 15 years ago from the state's Upper Peninsula, or UP. He's the subject of a new investigative podcast from the Detroit Free Press, Where Secrets Go to Die, the disappearance of Derek Hennigan. Joining us now is the podcast host, reporter John Wisely. John, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Taylor. Great to be here.
So John, who is Derek Hennigan and what happened to him?
He was 35 when he disappeared in 2008. He grew up in southwest lower Michigan towards Chicago, moved to upper Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, in late 2007, 2008. Met up with a local woman, moved in with her. She was pregnant with his child, and then he vanished. Their relationship had been stormy, and they'd had the police out to the house several times, but no one's ever been charged with his disappearance or death.
John, let's take a listen to a clip from the podcast.
So I said, who cares who you got in your back pocket? I'm going to call the state police and I'm going to file a complaint against you. She said, I don't care. I don't care. Maybe I'll just call him right now. And picks up her phone and starts dialing a number. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I told you I have Trooper Mogenberg in my back pocket.
Tell us about that clip. Who are we hearing from there, and whose back pocket are we talking about?
So the voice you're hearing there is a woman named Jody Newman, and she's an integral part of this story. Technically, you could call her a bounty hunter. She was a bail bondswoman who had bonded Derek Hennigan out of jail. So when he disappeared, her bond company lost the $1,000 bond that they had posted for him. So she began searching for him, and she's been relentless in trying to find him. She befriended his mom, and long after it mattered to the bond company, she stuck with the case and continued to investigate it. She's talking there about her first trip to the UP to search for Derek, nailed up some missing person posters, that kind of thing. And Derek's girlfriend, the woman with whom he'd lived, Jody says, was harassing her. And so she said she was going to file a complaint with the Michigan State Police. Derek's girlfriend said, well, you go ahead and do that because I've got Mo in my back pocket. And Mo turns out to be a local state trooper who also becomes a very integral part of this story. He had a lot of baggage of his own, and we get into that quite a bit in the middle of the podcast.
John, why did you decide to do a podcast on this case?
Originally in 2015, there was a bizarre crime up there. There was a triple murder. 3 young people were killed in what looked like a drug deal gone bad, but that kind of thing doesn't happen up there very often. So the Free Press sent a colleague of mine and a photographer up to kind of do, traditional Sunday takeout on that triple murder. And after that story published, we started getting calls from people up there saying, there's more here. That was a salacious crime and it was one crime, but there's a lot of other things going on up here related to it and around it. And so that kind of piqued our interest. And then we eventually got a call from that state trooper, Mogenberg's daughter, who said she believed her father was involved in the disappearance of Derek Hennigan. And she told us some things that she'd heard from him. He would often threaten her and her mom with things like, I could kill you, and there's so many places in the UP to hide a body. Was that bluster, or was that just, being mean, or was there more to that? Those are some of the things we get into in the podcast.
And, after hearing the series, what's the big takeaway you'd like audiences to walk away with?
It's the story of a missing man, but the larger story is the way policing is conducted in some small rural communities. These are pretty remote, small towns. Michigan's Upper Peninsula is mostly national forest, and then you've got small towns kind of dotted in between it. So you might have one small town, then 20 miles of woods, and then another. The way the Michigan State Police have handled this investigation has really left people with a lot of questions. And so as much as it's a story about a missing man, it's a story about police accountability in a small town where the police don't really have to answer to anyone. Because they're state police, they're accountable only to the governor. So there's not a real local mechanism for people who have complaints about them to register those complaints. And this story has kind of uncovered a lot of things that people have been talking about for years.
John Wisely from the Detroit Free Press, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it.
Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan, is out now on the Free Press website or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.